First we have Professor Philomena Murray. I'm going to race through these CVs because if I gave them any time we would be here the whole morning. So Professor Murray has just an amazing academic career. She's holds numerous honorary positions around the world. She's been awarded numerous EU-funded research grants, has heaps of experience leading international research teams, etc., etc., etc. She also first set up the first curriculum on the EU in Australia. So please join us on stage, Professor. And can I also introduce Chris Barrett? He'll be known to many of you in the audience. Chris is the Chief Executive Officer of Invest Australia. He's been back in... Invest Victoria. Invest Victoria, Australia. I got ahead of myself because what I was about to say is he's been back in Australia for a relatively short period of time. It is nice to see him back here. He's got a long career in the public service, both in Canberra and Melbourne, and is well placed to speak on a number of issues this morning. So Chris, please join us on stage. Thank you. Yeah. Now, as I said, I was telling the panelists I'm going to ask each one of them a quick question just to get things going, and then I will turn to the audience because I think you're going to enjoy the opportunity to ask a question or two. But Prime Minister, let me start with you. My question to you was going to be around, in this world of sort of growing protectionism, what countries like Australia and the Netherlands should be doing. What's the right response there? That was, mainly in a trade and investment sort of sense, but you've also now raised the issue around, the sort of global response to climate. How do you see countries like Australia and the Netherlands playing their role there and playing a role in leading it or getting to some point of an international sort of approach to this?
Well, we are the middle powers. Australia is 14th biggest economy in the world. The Netherlands is the 18th biggest economy in the world. We are both in the top 20. We are not of the size of Germany or Japan or China or the US, but we have a size. We have an impact, and we only got there because we know that we need to work together worldwide. And I was honored to give a speech or an introduction yesterday at the Lowy Institute in Sydney. And basically my theme was that in this world of growing anxiety about multilateralism and about world trade, that we need to change the system. So make use of the fact that so many people are now criticizing what is happening in the worldwide in terms of multilateralism. That this is a fantastic opportunity to reform the UN and the WTO, NATO, the European Union, of course what you have here, the Quad, but also how the Quad works together with ASEAN. This is, I believe, the opportunity to make these organizations work. So not withdraw from them, but get them to work in the interest of the people. And this is, I think, the task of Australia and the Netherlands, being about, I think, 18,000 kilometers, whatever. I mean, when we stamp on the floor, you will hear it. Because we are exactly on the other side of the globe. But in this sense, we are really neighbors. We live next to each other, and we have to hold hands here.
Yeah, great. Philomena, you're nodding a lot, so let's, without me asking you a question, I mean, you've got tremendous experience in looking at crises and how we respond to them, and so what's your take on that?
I think I would agree with the Prime Minister. I think it's far more than trade, and I know that the Prime Minister has spoken about this. We really are looking at huge challenges to the commitment to global governance institutions. So it goes beyond the WTO. We're looking at the United Nations. We're looking at the need for the G20 and indeed the Asia-Europe meeting, now that Australia is a member alongside many Asian countries and European countries. So really there's a possibility for middle powers to do an awful lot more than they have been doing in the past. Now, the Netherlands has always been a leader within the European Union of the non-big countries, let's say. It trains its diplomats terrifically in Klingendal, for instance, and indeed others. And it really has got a very good understanding of niche diplomacy, which is where I think Australia and the Netherlands could work together. I think they could work together on promoting values around humanitarianism, values around maintaining good governance, but also about inclusiveness, so that rather than saying we know that China, Russia, and increasingly the United States are regarded as undermining global governance norms which have been part of the structure for so long, since the end of the Second World War. Rather than doing that, rather to look at the idea of socialising them into the rules but making them keep the rules. And that's where I think middle powers could actually have a role. And I think Australia and the Netherlands could work together in what we in academia sometimes call mini-lateralism. I think there's a fantastic opportunity there.
Yeah, I have to say it really resonates with me. I worked at the International Monetary Fund during the Asian financial crisis, and the constituencies of Australia and the Netherlands were quite similar in that you had these smaller countries that were leading constituencies that were incredibly diverse, both of which had Asian members in them, in trying to find a path through the right response to the Asian financial crisis, and there was just so much similarity. And I think when we talk about this now, sort of going back and understanding the leadership that both countries showed within the institutions like the IMF and the World Bank and things like that, actually, there is actually a little bit of a case study there. Chris, if I can just change tack a little bit. I mean, so we're talking multilateralism, mini-lateralism, but of course one of the responses to a lot of the uncertainty and protectionism has also been to try to advance trade wherever we can, including through free trade agreements. With the uncertainty of Brexit, one of the things that people are talking more about is free trade agreements. I mean, how do you see that, the role of free trade agreements creating opportunities for Australia with the EU and for Australia with the Netherlands?
Yeah, so thanks, Melinda. And I think the first question is also, why do the free trade agreements matter? They matter because we're entering a world we seem to be in a world increasingly of secular stagnation, and getting growth going. The kinds of low-hanging fruit that you can get from free trade agreements is so important to that growth story in a world that's searching for growth in so many different places. I had a statistic the other day that just shocked me, which is there is literally $17 trillion globally that is experiencing negative yields at the moment. So the search for growth and through trade is incredibly important. Look, we're going through this process of trying to form a free trade agreement with the EU at the moment, which is an incredibly important process. Incredibly important process for Victoria and for Australia. Just to give you some numbers, according to one of the EU's scoping studies in 2017, an FTA with the EU could deliver a windfall of between $4.1 billion and $6.4 billion in GDP for Australia by 2030. From Victoria's point of view, we're in particular a major food exporter. That's a great opportunity for us. That may not always be welcome in terms of agricultural markets in Europe, but the Netherlands are such a terrific agricultural producer. I'm sure they wouldn't be afraid of some Australian competition. But the final point that I would want to make is my day job is to think about investment as well. So it's not just the EU FTA, it's the FTAs that Australia, for example, has in our region with China, with Japan, with Korea, with Malaysia. Those are magnificent opportunities, you would expect me to say this, for Dutch firms, for other firms to invest here in Australia and avail themselves of those FTAs that we have. We're in the right time zone, we're in the right part of the world to do that exporting, so that's a magnificent opportunity for businesses here, for businesses to come here as well.
The link I was going to join there as well is the Prime Minister challenged us around technology. And presented an optimistic approach around, attitude towards the role that innovation and technology plays, and of course trade and investment are important conduits, for us, particularly to get access to the capital that can help transform our own businesses and in responding to not just issues of competitiveness but also sustainability, as you highlighted. Now, you can see right from the start that the four of us could go on all morning here, right? So now's the time. Yeah. If there are questions in the audience, now's the time. Hand up, please. There's one here. If you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself and where you're from, and then directing your question to the Prime Minister. No.
Andrew Tulloch from the Victorian Government. Prime Minister, you mentioned innovation in your early remarks in a very positive sense. I was wondering if you could give us a sense of how you addressed that issue in the Netherlands. Obviously, it's a topic that has a lot of sensitivity around it, associated with a lot of disruption and uncertainty. How have you got people in the Netherlands to talk about and engage with such an important topic as innovation?
Why is there disruption around innovation? You mean linked to climate change or generally?
Generally innovation in terms of change in industry, change in job types, disruption to employment, for instance. How have you engaged in that sort of debate when it's often difficult for the general public to view that positively?
Well, but this is always the case, that when you talk about innovation, for example, robotization or automation. Just one example, we have a car factory in the south of the country which employed only 1,500 people. Then automation came in and robotization, is it English, robotization? Yeah, robotization came in. And now we have 6,500 people working there because that factory became competitive. And in that sense, you have to make sure that it is always the one and the other. If it is just innovation because some people in the elite think that it's great to talk about innovation at dinner parties or whatever, then you will lose the general public. But when it is clear that innovation has to be at the core of every key sector of your industry, and agricultural and services sector, to maintain the job growth, then people understand that at the moment we have an unemployment of just over 3%, we are growing close to 2%. And that is to a large part because we decided 10 years ago to focus on a few key top sectors, like IT, agriculture, water management, which for our country, my country, is crucial as half of the country below sea level. And that has helped us to focus research, development, innovation, challenging companies, challenging the system from outside. But it has to go hand in hand with job growth and growth of GDP, so that people sense that this is the way forward. Otherwise, they will become conservative and basically move against these changes because they are afraid that it will change their livelihood without seeing the benefit.
I had the opportunity to travel to the Netherlands as one of a series of countries we were going through to try as a director of a company here in Australia where we were looking for innovation actually in human service delivery. So not just in robotics, but actually looking at innovation around how human services were delivered in different models. And there are just some tremendous examples in the Netherlands. It's exactly that, trying to connect the benefits of new ways of doing things, using technology, but to deliver services in care that were transformative and more customer human-centric, if I can put it that way. So huge examples. Can I actually join the dots on one thing we were talking about before, which is one of the other areas where people are really grappling with technology is the governance of it, and international governance around new technology and
AI,
artificial intelligence, even social media. How is the Netherlands grappling with that? And from a global perspective, Philomena, have you got a view on what progress needs to be made there, and again, what role countries like Australia and the Netherlands?
Well, the Netherlands is very flat in every sense, literally, but also there's no hierarchy. That means that we discuss endlessly about everything, but then at the end, and nobody really has then a decision-making power, but somehow we come to a decision, and the positive of all of this is that then that decision has broad support. And for example, in AI, we want to become the AI hub outside the US. Well, everybody wants to become the AI hub outside the US. But we think we have a shot at it. We have our key industries now pulling together. We launched our AI strategy last week. But a crucial issue here is the governance and privacy laws, etc. And here we decided that we cannot do that ourselves. We need industry to be part of that debate. And I think by requiring smaller, but particularly also the big industry players, for example, Microsoft, which is very big in the AI sector at the moment, And we had lengthy discussions, I also personally, with the CEO of Microsoft. So you cannot require me to come up with legislation or governance on an issue which we don't understand fully. So you have to help us. We have to do it in co-creation. And at the end, of course, it is the government and a democratic system which then has to decide. But that input needs to come also from the industry. And that will also force them to look at this from these various angles, not just a profit-making point of view, and how you can apply it in everyday life, but also what it means in terms of indeed privacy and other main issues of personal lives of all of us. If this is really, AI might be more transformational than the internet, some think. If that is true, then we better also get this governance thing right at the start.
Yes, I think you're right. I think on the governance level also we need to look at how social media is being used and how it's being undermined. We absolutely don't have any governance approach to bots, for instance, at the moment. As somebody who's been trolled by them, believe me, it would be nice. And so what we've got is we've got those aspects of intelligence and artificial intelligence which are being used to undermine democracy, to actually undermine good governance. And this is where we have very little regional governance and absolutely no global governance at present. So the EU, for instance, does have a cybersecurity position and a cybersecurity policy. It is talking about that with Australia in the context of the recently agreed framework agreement between Australia and the European Union. So I think the more that we can join the dots, as it were, under what's called connectivity, the better, especially as you've got an alternative connectivity approach being presented with the Belt and Road Initiative by China, for instance. So it's not only about intelligence in terms of artificial intelligence, it's also about the great challenge of the Belt and Road Initiative. And thirdly, my last point would be, when it comes to innovation, I totally agree with the Prime Minister, and I think one of the advantages of us being able to access European Union schemes, such as the European Research Council, where I've been an assessor, is that we actually can access high risk, high gain research. The EU is the largest funder in the world for that, and now we can start to access that. So I think there are other ways in which we're looking at that connectivity of the top researchers, top scholars, joint ventures. I think all of that is just hugely innovative, and I could see a very important place for the Netherlands in working on this with within the European Union, leading it with Australia.
Question over here, thanks.
Thank you so much for the sound doesn't work.
Yeah, it does.
Yes, my name is Erwin Boermans. I originate from the Netherlands, where I was labeled by your predecessor, Prime Minister Rutte, as the renewable energy champion 20 years ago in Rotterdam for the breakthroughs that we made with the most hated building in the country, the former tax office, and we transformed that building into affordable housing.
Yeah.
And he labeled me that label, and that brought us through.
We still have some tax officers you need to...
Students and elderly in the same most hated building.
Yeah.
And the Germans tried to bomb that building. Are we able to create impact makers here to create these non-siloed big mission statements to be implemented? Because we are very segmented. I'm an entrepreneur here, I'm an educator as well at 4 different universities. Well, we all know that bureaucracies are a difficult vehicle to go through, but if you have a navigation beacon, an impact-making guidance, then you have a lot of followers. Maybe.
But never ask the government to tell you what the impact will come from, because we don't know. What we can do, I had a fascinating session yesterday on the boat in Sydney. We made a boat trip there, 45 minutes, and
This harbour cruise for the rest.
Harbour cruise, and on that ship we had about 25 Australians who have been to the Netherlands into biking schemes or building or sustainable development and smart cities, agriculture, everything. And one of the conclusions from that meeting I drew is that the best thing we as a government can do is convene people. We have the convening power. I mean, flat country, no hierarchy, but still, if I ask somebody, a professor or a industry leader to come to my office, he or she typically will come. And that helps a lot. And if I then would bring together industry, academia, the government, probably investors, to sit at a table, my experience is that as soon as that happens, you put a coffee on the table, they will start talking, and they can. It's bound to happen that they then will come to some form of cooperation. We see that all over the world. Here in Australia, it is typical for our type of democracies. So let's make use of the convening power we as governments have here at the state level, at the national level. Run away when a government tells you that this or that will be the industry of tomorrow, because probably they're wrong. They are famously incapable at making those choices.
So I think we've got time for one last question here, and we'll have to make it short, but please.
Thank you very much. I'm Dr. Mark Sanford, co-founder of Edison Projects Australia.
Oh, yeah.
It's basically a disruptive portable energy company involved in batteries, but we actually have a Dutchman who's part of our team, and that's someone called Thomas Friedhoff, not Thomas Edison. You may know him from his young VVV days. We're looking more to expand to the Netherlands than here, because the reception is, since the last election, less than supportive for such a thing. What would your suggestion be to engage with infrastructure that you already have there, such as the Waterstraat, which Steentje van Veldhoven is responsible for, and other organisations to go out of Australia and be disruptive and further sustainability with respect to climate change?
But I also hope you will continue doing that in Australia. Yes, because what I found in my discussion with Scott Morrison is that he is very much tuned into this issue of circular economy. I know that you had an election here, and looking from it outside, this was a contagious issue, climate change, and how you deal with that. But he clearly takes on board this whole issue of circular economy. We are getting this MOU done between us and between Australia and the Netherlands. We are working on it at various levels at the moment. Our embassy is very active at that. So I sense that this is genuine. I mean, he really wants this done. And there you need a lot of innovation and disruption. So please don't give up. You have to do that work here. And I'm happy if you also expand to the Netherlands. And we will happy to host you. And I mean, everybody, open arms, no problem. But don't do it as an alternative to Australia. I mean, also stick doing it here. And absolutely, I think that this government, more than you might think, based on my discussions with Scott Morrison, is open to that type of innovations. As long as you can tell him that there is economic growth and jobs involved. And there we agree. Because you cannot just only talk about this issue from the environmental point of view. There has to be a sustainability in terms of future growth, new jobs, a new type of economy growing.
Well, I think there's so much more we could talk about. We've covered just an incredible range of issues already, but I think if I can summarise it, I think there's a strong consensus amongst us, and I think in the questioning from the audience as well, about the great opportunities that are before us, the importance of trade and investment in a time of pretty stagnant growth around the world, but also as this conduit for ideas, for new technologies, and the sorts of partnerships that we can form to actually advance issues and to make progress, and that for two countries that aren't as big as others in the world, that working together where we have such strong shared values, there is tremendous opportunity, and we should be very glass half full on that front. Prime Minister, it's been fantastic having you on the CEDA stage. I know people have been very excited to have you in Australia. We look forward to welcoming you back at some point in the future. And can I thank Philomena and Chris as well for their contributions today. Thank you very much.
Very nice. Yeah, thank you. Thank you well.
Yeah, thank you well. Thank you so much.